3 true horror stories of terrifying encounters deep in the Appalachian Mountains. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains, where fog moves like breath and silence feels alive, people vanish, and some who return never speak again. Tonight, we uncover 3 terrifying true stories: the circle by the lake, the light on the ridge, and the man by the creek. Each one whispered through generations, each one ending the same way, with someone watching from the trees. So turn down the lights and listen close. The circle by the lake. It began like most harmless adventures, a group of friends escaping the noise of the city for a quiet October weekend in the Smoky Mountains. The plan was simple: a few hikes, a few campfires, and a few days of breathing air that didn't smell like car exhaust or cheap coffee. There were 7 of them in total: Carla, Mia, Brandon, Tyler, Rachel, Jen, and Nate. All in their mid-20s, bonded by years of college memories and half-kept promises to get away more often. They picked Fontana Lake, a remote stretch of water that hugged the Appalachian Trail in western North Carolina. The pictures online showed a glassy lake surrounded by endless ridges and trees, the kind of place that looked too still to be real. By the time they arrived on Friday afternoon, the air was cool, heavy with the scent of pine and earth. The forest glowed in shades of red and gold, the leaves whispering like soft rain as they fell. They pitched their tents near the water, laughing as the wind tried to pull the fabric from their hands. "Feels like we've got the whole world to ourselves," Brandon said, tossing a log into the fire pit. "Yeah," Mia replied softly, looking out at the trees. "Almost too quiet, though." The others chuckled, but there was a hint of agreement in their laughter. The lake stretched wide and empty. Not a single other camper in sight. No distant hum of cars. No sign of life beyond the slow ripple of water against the rocks. That night, they cooked sausages over the fire, swapped stories about bad exes and office drama, and let the glow of the flames blur into the sound of crickets and night wind. Around midnight, the forest seemed to exhale, the air shifting colder, the woods darker. Mia was the first to notice. "Do you see that?" she asked, pointing past the trees. Everyone turned, squinting into the darkness. Between the trunks, maybe 30 feet away, stood someone, still and tall. For a second, they all froze. Then Brandon laughed nervously. Probably another camper. But when he shouted, "Hey, you good, man?" the figure didn't move. Didn't even flinch. Tyler grabbed a flashlight and flicked it on, but by the time the beam hit the trees, the shape was gone. They searched the spot together, laughing off the nerves. "You sure you didn't just see a shadow?" Rachel asked. "I know what I saw," Mia whispered. That's when they found it. A still warm cigarette but pressed into the dirt, smoke curling faintly into the cold air. None of them smoked. The laughter died. They decided to let it go, retreating back to the fire, trying to convince themselves it was nothing. But the mood had shifted. Even the forest seemed to have grown heavier. When they finally went to sleep, the wind had died completely. The forest held its breath. Sometime after 3 a.m., the sound came, soft, deliberate footsteps moving in a circle around the camp. Carla heard it first. She opened her eyes, the hair on her arms rising. Through the tent wall, she could see shadows moving, slow, cautious, like someone studying each tent one by one. "Brandon," she whispered, nudging him awake. He froze, listening. The steps came again, crunch, pause, crunch. Then silence. For a long minute, the forest was completely still. Carla held her breath. Then, faintly, she heard something else, the sound of whispering. Not words she could understand, but rhythmic, low, like a chant carried by the wind. Before she could speak, the sound cut off. Then darkness swallowed everything. The next thing any of them remembered was the scream. Carla's own. She jolted awake, gasping, the early dawn light stabbing through her eyelids. Her head pounded. The air reeked of something metallic. When she sat up, she wasn't in her tent anymore. They were all lying together in a clearing they didn't recognize. 7 of them, side by side, each covered in a red cloth that looked like satin, the edges soaked in something dark. The air was heavy still. "Mia?" Carla croaked. Mia stirred beside her, eyes wide, terrified. One by one the others woke up, groaning, confused. None of them knew how they'd gotten there. Rachel began to cry when she noticed they weren't wearing any of their clothes, only those crimson sheets tied loosely around their bodies. "What the hell is this?" Brandon shouted, staggering to his feet. The clearing was circular, the grass flattened in a perfect ring around them. In the center was a black cloth soaked with something that hadn't fully dried. It looked like blood, but none of them wanted to believe it. There were symbols etched into the dirt, strange, crude markings in a perfect spiral around the group. Tyler found their tents half a mile away, untouched. Their bags, food, clothes, everything was there, exactly as they'd left it. When they drove back to town later that morning, no one spoke. Not even when they reached the ranger station. The police called it a possible ritual site. They said local cult groups sometimes performed cleansings or rebirth ceremonies deep in the Appalachians. But when the officers searched the area later that day, the red sheets and the black cloth were gone. Only the symbols remained, carved into the soil so deeply it looked burned. Tests from the ground samples came back weeks later. The red residue wasn't animal blood, but it wasn't human either. The friends tried to move on. They stopped camping. They stopped talking about it. But in October the next year, Mia called Carla in tears. "I had that dream again," she whispered. "The one where we're lying in the circle. And someone's whispering my name." Carla had been having the same dream. Every year since, one or more of them wakes in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, hearing that same chant echoing faintly in their ears, the same sound from that night. The police never found a suspect. Locals still talk about an old group that practiced blood renewal rituals near Fontana Lake every October, people who believed the mountains themselves demanded offerings. Carla says she doesn't believe in any of that, but she hasn't gone camping since. None of them have. And sometimes, when she drives past the woods on her way to Asheville, she swears she can still see it, a faint ring of red deep among the trees, glimmering in the morning fog like something waiting for her to come back. The light on the ridge. It happened 10 years before the incident at Fontana Lake, but in almost the same stretch of mountains. Locals around Hot Springs, North Carolina, still talk about it. 3 friends who went into the woods and came back changed. Tanner, Jake, and Cole had known each other since high school. The Appalachian Mountains were their playground, every trail, every fishing spot, every hidden clearing. They'd grown up in that silence and trusted it. On a Friday in late September, they loaded up Tanner's old Jeep with gear, beer, and 2 packs of instant chili. Their plan was to camp along a ridge just north of the French Broad River, a secluded spot with a view that stretched for miles. It took them half a day to get there. By the time they found the right trailhead, the sun was already sinking behind the mountains. The air smelled of moss and damp earth. Crickets hummed, owls called, and the first stars began to appear above the treetops. "Man, this is the life," Cole said, cracking open a beer as they pitched the tent. "No cell service, no bosses, no bills." Jake laughed. "Just bears, coyotes, and ghosts." "Yeah," Tanner added with a grin, "and probably meth heads too." The 3 of them laughed, but even jokes felt smaller out there, like the forest swallowed sound before it could escape. By nightfall, the fire was burning bright, crackling against the cold air. They sat around it, roasting sausages, watching sparks rise like fireflies into the dark. From the ridge, the valley below was an endless ocean of black, dotted with faint lights from distant cabins. It was peaceful until Tanner saw it. "Hey," he said quietly, nodding toward the opposite ridge. "Do you guys see that?" At first, the others didn't. Then Jake squinted, following his gaze. A light, small, steady, glowing white, hovered on the ridge across from them. "Probably a camper," Cole said. "Too still," Tanner murmured. "It's not moving at all." They watched it for a long time, expecting it to sway or flicker like a lantern. But it didn't. It just floated, unmoving, cold and pale. After a few minutes, Jake stood up and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Oh, you lost," he shouted. His voice echoed across the valley and disappeared. The light didn't move, didn't blink. Tanner raised his phone, trying to zoom in with the flashlight app, but there was nothing visible, just a void where the light should have been. Maybe a drone? Cole suggested, but his voice wavered. Who'd be flying a drone out here in the dark? By midnight, the fire had burned low, and the light was still there, watching. Eventually, they went to bed, Tanner in one tent, Jake and Cole in another. It was Tanner who woke first. Something had pulled him from sleep, not a noise, but an absence of it. The forest had gone dead silent. Then came the faint crunch of footsteps. He held his breath. The steps were light, cautious, circling his tent. Then another set joined them, heavier, slower. "Jake?" Tanner whispered. No response. The shadow of something passed across the thin tent wall, tall, too tall. He grabbed the flashlight, clicked it on, and pointed it toward the shape. Nothing. Then a face pressed against the fabric. Just the outline of it, inches away, lips curled in a faint smile. Tanner shouted and punched the tent wall. The thing moved fast, faster than any human could. The sound of running, leaves crunching, branches snapping, and then silence. Jake and Cole came stumbling out of their tent, flashlights flailing. "What the hell was that?" Jake hissed. "Someone's out here," Tanner said. His voice shook. "Something's out here." They didn't sleep again. They sat up until dawn, backs against the fire pit, eyes on the trees. When the first light broke, they saw the footprints. Dozens of them. Some were bare, some booted, all circling their tents. Deep, fresh, pressed into the damp earth. But they didn't lead in or out of the clearing. Just around. As they packed, Jake stopped suddenly. "You smell that?" It was faint, metallic, like rust or blood. It clung to the trees, mixed with the smell of wet leaves. They left without breakfast. The hike back felt endless. Every few minutes, Tanner turned around, sure he'd heard something following. Once, he swore he saw movement, a flicker of white light between the trunks, distant but steady, pacing them. By the time they reached the jeep, the air was thick with morning fog. And that's when they saw it, an old, rusted pickup truck parked beside theirs. It hadn't been there yesterday. The windows were fogged from the inside, and faint condensation dripped down the windshield. Jake stepped closer, hand trembling. "It's warm," he whispered. The hood was hot, like it had just been running. But no one was inside. No keys. No tracks. Just that faint smell again, iron and smoke. They left fast. Tanner drove without speaking until they hit the main road, and even then, nobody said a word. When they got home, they tried to laugh it off. "Probably some old hunter messing with us," Cole said, though his voice sounded hollow. But over the next few weeks, Tanner started noticing strange things. His radio would cut out when he drove through the mountain pass, static filling the air. Once, he thought he heard whispering through the noise, soft, distant, like someone breathing words into the signal. Jake said his phone sometimes lit up at night, the screen glowing white for a few seconds, even when it was turned off. And Cole, well, he stopped camping altogether. When Tanner visited him 2 months later, he noticed every window in his house was covered with newspaper. "You been sleeping okay?" Tanner asked. Cole just looked at him and said, "You ever think that light wasn't looking at us, but for us?" That winter, Cole moved out of state. No one heard from him again. A few years later, Jake died in a car crash on a mountain road near where they camped. When police towed the wreck, the dashboard camera still had power. The last thing it recorded was 5 seconds of static, and a white light glowing faintly through the fog ahead. Locals still talk about that ridge. Hikers say they sometimes see the same light on foggy nights, hovering silently above the trees, never moving. Rangers say it's swamp gas or reflected headlights. But those who've seen it up close, those who know the story, will tell you different. They say it watches, waits, and if you look at it too long, it starts to move closer. He-Man by the Creek. It's been almost 20 years since the events at the ridge, and people still whisper about it in the small towns scattered along the Appalachian border. But not all stories get told the same way. Some stay quiet because the people who lived them never made it back, and some because the ones who did wish they hadn't. This last story came from a man named Eli Porter, a retired park ranger who spent 3 decades watching over the Smoky Mountain trails. He was the kind of man who didn't scare easy, a veteran, a hunter, a man who'd seen storms, wildfires, and more lost hikers than he could count. But when Eli finally told his story, his voice cracked. He told it like a confession. It started in the summer of 2003. He'd been assigned to patrol a section of wilderness that bordered the Deep Creek area, dense woods, winding streams, and narrow ridges. It was the kind of place where you could walk for days and never see another soul. That year, reports had started coming in about strange sounds echoing through the forest, faint knocking voices that seemed to travel with the wind. A few campers said they'd seen someone wandering at night near the creek. Always alone, always standing still. Eli didn't think much of it at first. Probably just squatters or night hunters, he told his supervisor. But he decided to check it out anyway. He hiked out one morning just after sunrise, carrying his standard pack: radio, water, pistol, and map. The woods were alive with cicadas and the steady hum of the creek below. He followed it for miles, marking trees with red tape, until he found something strange. A small clearing. There was an old tent, half collapsed, faded from the sun. Beside it sat a rusted metal chair, and on the chair was a lantern, still hanging from its hook, unbroken, unburned, but clean, like it had been polished yesterday. No footprints. No trash. No signs of life. He called it in, logged the coordinates, and moved on. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something carved into a nearby tree trunk. It was a circle, perfectly round, with a vertical line running through the center, like an eye split down the middle. Inside the bark, the wood was still wet and fresh. It hadn't been there long. By late afternoon, the woods grew darker. Clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the sunlight. Eli decided to make camp early, near the creek. He built a small fire, set up his tent, and ate a can of beans. The air felt heavy, and the forest seemed to hum with a strange energy. That's when he heard it, a splash. It came from down by the water, maybe 20 feet away. He turned off his headlamp and listened. Another splash. Then a soft sound, like someone dragging their feet through the shallow current. He called out, "Hey there, park ranger. You all right?" Silence. Then came a voice, quiet, cracked, like it hadn't been used in years. "Cold night, ain't it?" Eli froze. He pointed his flashlight toward the creek. There was a man standing knee-deep in the water, facing away. He wore what looked like torn overalls, the fabric dark and heavy with water. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his head hung low like he was staring at something in his hands. "Sir, you need to come out of there," Eli said firmly, one hand on his pistol. "You can't be in this area after dark." The man didn't move. Then he spoke again, barely audible. "You seen the light?" Eli hesitated. "What light?" The man slowly turned his head, not all the way, just enough for Eli to see part of his face. His eyes reflected the flashlight beam in a way that didn't look natural, more like glass than flesh. Eli took a cautious step forward. "Sir, I'm gonna need you to..." But before he could finish, the man sank. Like the creek had opened beneath him and pulled him under. Eli rushed forward, flashlight shaking. The water was clear, no bubbles, no body, no ripples. Just the sound of the current moving on like nothing had happened. He stayed awake all night, radio in hand, but the signal kept cutting out. Each time he tried to call in, all he heard was static, and behind it, a faint whispering that almost sounded like his own name. By dawn, his nerves were shredded. He packed fast and started heading back toward base. The forest was eerily quiet, the birds silent, even the insects gone. When he reached the ridge overlooking the creek, he saw something that made his blood run cold. In the clearing below, the same one with the old tent and chair, the lantern was lit. It glowed with that same pale white light Tanner had once seen years earlier. And standing beside it, just barely visible through the trees, was a figure. The man. He was dry now, standing perfectly still, staring up toward the ridge, right at Eli. Eli turned and ran. He didn't stop until he reached the ranger station, lungs burning, boots caked in mud. He reported everything, but when the team went back out the next day, there was nothing. No tent. No footprints. No lantern. Just the circle symbol carved into a tree near the creek, fresh again, the wood still wet. Eli retired 2 years later. Moved to Asheville. bought a small cabin near town. But even after all those years, he said the feeling never left him. The sense that something had followed him home. Sometimes, late at night, when the fog rolled down from the mountains, he'd see a faint glow in the trees behind his house. White, still, silent. He stopped going outside after dark. The last time anyone heard from him was in 2014, when a neighbor called to report that Eli hadn't been answering his phone. When police arrived, they found his cabin unlocked, lights off, dinner still on the table. There was no sign of struggle. No blood. No tracks. Just one thing on the porch, an old metal lantern, glowing faintly with a white flame inside. It was cold to the touch. And on the wood beside it, someone had carved that same symbol, the circle with the line through it. They never found Eli Porter. But sometimes, hikers still claim to see a man by the creek, pale, silent, wearing soaked overalls. They say he doesn't move, doesn't blink, just stands there watching. And if you call out to him, he'll ask you the same question. You seen the light? They say the mountains remember every voice, every soul, every scream. If you hear a whisper calling from the woods, don't answer. Because in Appalachia, what's taken never comes back. If these stories chilled you to the bone, hit like, comment, and subscribe for more true horror from the dark side of the mountains.